Good morning and welcome to the Zoom service of UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. UUCC is a congregation that fosters personal and spiritual growth through religious exploration in search of the truth while celebrating diversity and affirming the worth and dignity of every person. We're glad that you are joining us. I'm Danielle Lyon, and this is Thomas Lyon. We're your worship coordinators. And our guest today is Pamela Dayton. Pamela Dayton is an activist, theologian, and mom. She spends days and overnights as chaplain resident at Strong Hospital and is completing the requirements for ordination in the Metropolitan Community Church. Pamela has a master's degree in social justice and theology from Kilns College and a Master of Divinity from Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. Her work primarily revolves around the intersectionality of race, LGBTQ, and advocacy. Pamela is currently writing a critique of the religious exemption to the COVID-19 vaccine mandates for healthcare workers that she will submit for publication this month. Pamela has 5 teenage sons and lives in Rochester with her partner and 3 cats. Just one announcement for today. Next Sunday, October 10th, we will plan to worship outdoors at church, but also to live stream to YouTube for any of us who are unable to join in person. We will plan on wearing masks and having some extras if you happen to forget yours. Childcare will be available during the service by vaccinated volunteers. Please check your email before leaving for church in case the weather decides we should meet on Zoom instead. Now we will enter a space for worship.
We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Our opening words today is a poem by Mary Oliver called Coming Home. When we are driving in the dark on the long road to Provincetown, when we are weary, when the buildings and the scrub pines lose their familiar look, I imagine us rising from a speeding car. I imagine us seeing everything from another place, the top of one of the pale dunes or the deep and nameless fields of the sea. And what we see is a world that cannot cherish us, but wish we cherish. And what we see is our life moving like that along the dark edges of everything, headlights sweeping the blackness, believing in 1,000 fragile and unprovable things, looking out for sorrow, slowing down for happiness, making all the right turns, right down to the thumping barriers to the sea, the swirling waves, the narrow streets, the houses, the past, the future, the doorway that belongs to you and me. Our opening hymn is number 213, There's a Wideness in Your Mercy.
There's a wideness in your mercy, like the wideness
And now it's time for a story.
In a beautiful meadow, up in a tall tree, there lived a colony of bees. The bees were all friends. When they were flying together, sometimes the bees would accidentally run into each other. "I'm sorry," the bee would say. "That's okay. I forgive you," the other bee would say. And the bees would keep flying together. They went on flower hunts together. They had bee races together. They worked together. And they flew way up high into the sky together. The bees were happy. But one day, something different happened. Two bees crashed into each other. "I'm sorry," said the first bee. "You got in my way," the angry bee said. "I'm not flying with you anymore." The angry bee flew away. "I'll show you," the angry bee said. The angry bee landed on a leaf and waited for the other bee to feel bad. "I'm gonna sit here all day." It was time to go on a flower hunt. All of the bees went looking for flowers together. But not the angry bee. He sat on a leaf being angry. "I'll show that bee," the angry bee said. "I'm going to sit here all day." Now it was time for a bee race. They flew as fast as they could, and they all had fun racing. But not the angry bee. He sat on a leaf being angry. "I'll show that bee," the angry bee said. "I'm going to sit here all day." Now it was time for the bees to make honey. All of the bees worked very hard, and they made lots of honey together. But not the angry bee. He sat on a leaf being angry. "I'll show that bee," the angry bee said. "I'm going to sit here all day." Now it was time for the bees to fly really high up in the sky. They loved seeing who could fly the highest, and they flew up, up, up into the clouds. But not the angry bee. He sat on a leaf, being angry. "I'll show that bee," the angry bee said. "I'm going to sit here all day." But it wasn't working. All of the other bees were still happy. The other bees asked the angry bee to come and fly with them. "No, I'm still mad at him," said the angry bee. "Okay," said the bees. "We'll see you later then." The angry bee started to feel a little bit sad. He missed flying with the other bees. And he wanted to go on flower hunts again and help make honey. "I could be happy again," the bee said, "and I could do all my favorite things. All I have to do is forgive." He thought about it, and then
We are a community that holds one another in our celebrations and our pain. Please share your joys and sorrows in the chat box in Zoom, or if you'd prefer, you can send an email directly to Reverend Eileen, and she can work with those. Wherever you are, know that whatever's on your heart, we are with you. right. For the joys and sorrows shared and those held in our heart, particularly children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, accomplishing many great things. Additional supplies for migrants, birthdays, other celebrations, unexpected passings of loved ones and close friends, adjusting to new changes in our life. All these we hold close in our heart.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts support the church in its work. That work is summarized in our covenant. The covenant for UUCC says, in service of the values that unite us, we will recognize the inherent value of each person, foster a community of compassion and caring for all, value our diverse opinions, and engage respectfully in all interactions. If you would like to give to this morning's offering, you can give online at canandaiguauu.org/connect or physically by mailing a check to the church. In either case, note if you'd like your gift to go toward the Sunday offering or your pledge. We'll share 25% of it with our monthly Sunday offerings with our service partner. The designated offering recipient chosen by Team 6 for the homecoming season is Keeping Our Promise, an organization with a mission to provide comprehensive resettlement assistance to endangered wartime allies who served U.S. interests in conflict and war zones.
Now is the time for centering and shared silence. I invite you to take a deep breath with me. And as you exhale, release the weak. Take another breath. Breathe in the loveliness of the day. Think about connecting to the earth. Think about connecting with the people beside you. And focus on the moment of joy that made your day this week. Good morning. I'm so honored to be here with you today to celebrate the last week of your season of homecoming. So some of my favorite Bible story characters are the disciples. Each of them followed Jesus sight unseen. They left their families, their jobs. Some of them walked away from their fishing nets while they were fishing. I can't imagine myself dropping everything to walk around the country with a random guy who had been passing by. Now, this might be because I watch way too many true crime shows on Netflix to think that that's a good idea. The disciples knew there was something special about Jesus, but time and time again, it seemed like they just couldn't put their finger on what sort of special Jesus was. This inability to think critically about the information that was given to them did nothing to diminish their adoration or the competition to be the most beloved of the bunch. And this is where we find the disciples in the reading I chose for today. It's the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 1 through 9, and verses 21 and 22. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. Occasions for stumbling blocks are bound to come, but woe to the one by whom the stumbling block comes. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and to be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the hell of fire. That took a turn, didn't it? So then Peter came and said to him, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive them? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. So there's a lot of banter in this story, and I promise to engage the text thoughtfully and carefully. So to prepare ourselves to think about this scene, I invite you to imagine that you are the parent of children. Many of us are parents of children or know people who parent children, so this should be pretty easy. Is everyone imagining? Now imagine that these children really, really want to be your favorite child. And somehow they have come to believe that there is one definitive thing to do that will make one of them the actual best of the bunch. But you are a truly great parent, and you will not disclose to them what this mysterious thing is. And also, you will up the fun factor for yourself by telling them unsolvable riddles full of hyperbole. And this is where we find Jesus at company in the text. I imagine the crew sort of shuffling up to Jesus, bumping into each other and saying, "You ask it, you ask it. No, you ask it. No, you. Fine, we'll ask him. So Jesus, who's the greatest in heaven?" Jesus probably shakes his head and takes a deep breath. "Guys," he says, "you have to be humble like a child. And also, if you make life hard for these kids, you will wish you were tied to a weight and thrown in the sea. There's enough hardship in life without people trying to make it even harder. Oh, and if your hand does a thing to make life harder, chop it off. Same goes for your foot. And if your eye does, tear it out, throw it in the trash. Ain't nobody got time for that." Well, that escalated quickly. In a matter of seconds, Jesus went from be humble like a child straight to chop it off. Yikes. When I picture this, I can imagine the disciples sort of nodding along like, "Yep, humble, child, what?" These moments happen sort of frequently in the Gospels, and it is in these moments where Peter really shines. Peter seems to seek out moments that he can make even more awkward with his hold my beer vibe. So Peter says, if somebody does me wrong, how many times do I forgive him? Maybe 7? And we can't know if Peter expected Jesus to tell him to tie a heavy weight to the offender and toss them into the Sea of Galilee, or if he expected a different response. But Jesus said, no, not 7, 7 times 70. We also can't know if Peter knew that 7 times 70 equaled 490. But regardless of math skills, it's safe to assume that the listener understood that 7 times 70 was a lot of time. The number 7 in the Bible carries with it a state of sacredness. 7 is a significant number in biblical literature, and almost always it's a metaphor for wholeness. This tells us that the precise number of forgiveness is not as important as forgiving fully and completely. Today is the final Sunday celebrating the season of homecoming. I'm the new girl here, so I'm pretty sure that you know the theme for the homecoming is beginning again in love. And it comes from a really lovely litany of atonement. After each statement of accountability and responsibility, the people respond with, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. So, what is forgiveness exactly? And what does it mean to forgive? First and foremost, forgiveness recognizes the wrong that was done. Second, forgiveness is relational. And third, forgiveness involves release. Before we can even think about the possibility of forgiveness, it's important to recognize and to name the wrong that was done. A couple weeks ago, Reverend Eileen talked about the importance of naming our big feelings. She said, here's what we are not going to do. Pretend that everything is fine or that it will be without rage, tears, sweat. And we're not going to call that hope. Friends, naming is hard work and it can be very scary. Naming requires being brave from both parties. The injured person is brave when they claim the injury, and the person who caused the injury is brave when they face the consequences of their actions. Forgiveness requires a relationship. Whether or not you had a relationship with the person prior to the injury is immaterial. If that person hurt you or if you hurt another person, well, now you have a relationship with that person. And since we're not going to pretend everything is fine, we need to make a decision about who we are in this relationship and how we are going to conduct ourselves. These choices about how we plan to conduct ourselves lead us to the third point. You must release resentment. When I was a kid, I was taught that it was more important to reconcile or make up with the person I wronged or who wronged me. I was taught to apologize when I was wrong, and that the correct response to an apology was to say, I forgive you. After the injured person said, I forgive you, it was expected that everything was fine and the argument was over and all was forgotten, even when everybody knew everything was not fine and the stuff was about to hit the fan as soon as the parents turned their backs. That's not what I'm talking about here. Somehow, there we go. Releasing resentment is a choice that sets boundaries for yourself and for
Sorry, I muted you when I was trying to let someone in.
You muted me and my sermon went away, and then I found my sermon and now I'm not talking. So I'm going to take a hot second and find out and back up. Releasing resentment is a choice that sets boundaries for yourself and for your well-being. Releasing resentment for a really big injury might be something that you will need to do more than once or twice. It might take 70 times. Releasing resentment might need to be a spiritual practice that you engage with intentionality in order to keep yourself emotionally well. There's a theologian that studied forgiveness, and he says to forgive is to set a prisoner free, and that prisoner is you. Setting yourself free from injury caused by others is a choice. Setting yourself free from guilt you carry is also a choice. Be who you have chosen to be. Forgive yourselves and each other so that you can embody what it is to begin again in love. May it be so.
We can gift ourselves forgiveness. If we do, then we will find such a choice we make allows us right relationship to the divine. We're all children of one family. We're all sisters, brothers too. If you cherish one another, love and forgiveness will come to you.
Please, oh here, I'll start my video too. Please join us for hymn 179, Words That We Hold Tight.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our heart until we are together again.
Thank you all for joining us this Sunday. We hope that you'll have a few minutes to stick around and join our breakout rooms for some coffee hour socialization.